The autumn rain hammered against the windows of the King County Sheriff's Office as Detective Sarah Manning examined the corroded Kodak camera sitting on her desk. October 15th, 2005, marked exactly 15 years since two brothers had vanished without a trace on Washington's Cascade Trail, and this waterlogged device might finally hold the answers everyone had been searching for. The camera had been discovered 3 days earlier by retired couple Harold and Martha Stevenson from Bellevue during an off-trail hike near Snoqualmie Pass. Martha had spotted something metallic glinting through the clear water of a shallow creek bed, nestled between moss-covered rocks that had probably concealed it for over a decade. When Harold pulled the device from the water, they noticed a small strip of tape on the back bearing faded writing. Property of Michael Chen, 1990. The name sent a chill through Detective Manning's spine. Even though she'd been just a patrol officer in 1990, she remembered the Chen brothers' case vividly. It had been one of those disappearances that haunted the entire department. Two experienced hikers who had simply vanished into the wilderness without leaving a single trace behind. Michael Chen was 28 years old in 1990, a software engineer at Microsoft during the company's explosive growth period. His younger brother David, 24, worked as a photographer for the Seattle Times, documenting everything from city council meetings to Mariners games. Both brothers had grown up in nearby Issaquah and knew the Cascade Mountains like most people knew their neighborhood streets. They'd been hiking these trails since they were teenagers, often disappearing into the wilderness for entire weekends with nothing but backpacks and their shared love of the outdoors. If you're following this story with us today, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. These unsolved mysteries need our collective attention to ensure they're never forgotten. On Friday, October 5th, 1990, the brothers had loaded their gear into Michael's blue Toyota pickup and headed toward the mountains. Their plan was simple: drive to the Cascade Trail trailhead, hike 12 miles to a scenic overlook that David wanted to photograph during peak fall colors, camp overnight, and return home Sunday afternoon. David had been particularly excited about this trip, telling colleagues at the newspaper that he'd discovered a hidden waterfall during a solo scouting expedition weeks earlier and wanted to capture it with Michael's help. When Monday morning arrived and David failed to show up for his shift at the Seattle Times, his editor immediately knew something was wrong. David was obsessively punctual, the type of person who arrived 30 minutes early for everything. Phone calls to the brothers' apartments went unanswered, and calls to their parents in Issaquah confirmed that neither had returned home as planned. By Monday afternoon, King County Search and Rescue had launched a full-scale operation. They found the brothers' pickup truck exactly where it should have been, parked at the Cascade Trail trailhead, with their spare camping gear still inside. The truck showed no signs of forced entry or struggle, and their wallets and identification remained locked in the glove compartment. Everything suggested the brothers had begun their hike as planned, but after that, the trail went cold. The search effort was massive by 1990 standards. Dozens of volunteers joined professional search and rescue teams, combing the trail system and surrounding wilderness for any trace of the missing brothers. Helicopters conducted aerial surveys while tracking dogs worked the ground, following scent trails that seemed to disappear into thin air about 3 miles up the main trail. The search continued for 3 weeks, covering hundreds of square miles of rugged terrain, but turned up absolutely nothing. What made the case particularly puzzling was the brothers' level of experience. Michael was methodical and safety-conscious, always filing detailed hiking plans with someone before departing. David might have been more adventurous in pursuing photographic opportunities, but he wasn't reckless. Both carried emergency supplies and knew how to handle themselves in the wilderness. The idea that they could simply vanish without leaving any trace seemed impossible to everyone who knew them. Detective Manning carefully transported the recovered camera to the Washington State Crime Lab in Seattle, knowing that 15 years submerged in a mountain creek had probably destroyed any film inside. But modern forensic techniques had advanced considerably since 1990, and lab technicians thought there might be a slim chance of recovering something usable. The process would take weeks, involving careful extraction of the film and experimental restoration methods that pushed the boundaries of current technology. While waiting for results, Manning dove deep into the original case files, interviewing anyone still alive who had been connected to the investigation. The brothers' parents, now in their late 70s, still lived in the same Issaquah house where Michael and David had grown up. Their mother, Eleanor Chen, kept both sons' rooms exactly as they'd left them, maintaining hope that someday they would return home. The parents described their sons as inseparable despite their 4-year age difference. Michael had always been the protective older brother, while David brought creativity and spontaneity to their adventures. They'd been planning weekend hiking trips together since David graduated from college, exploring increasingly remote areas of the Cascades as their skills and confidence grew. The October 1990 trip was supposed to be routine, just another weekend adventure in mountains they knew well. Former colleagues at Microsoft and the Seattle Times painted similar pictures of responsible, competent young men who weren't prone to taking unnecessary risks. David's editor mentioned that he'd seemed particularly excited about photographing the hidden waterfall he'd discovered, describing it as the find of a lifetime for someone passionate about wilderness photography. This detail troubled Manning because it suggested the brothers might have deviated from established trails, venturing into unmarked territory that searchers might have missed entirely. As autumn turned to winter, Manning waited anxiously for word from the crime lab. The camera represented the first real lead in 15 years, and everyone involved in the case understood its potential significance. If the film could be restored, it might finally reveal what had happened to Michael and David Chen during those final mysterious hours in the Washington wilderness. 3 weeks before Christmas 2005, Dr. Patricia Reeves from the State Crime Lab called with news that would change everything. Against all odds, she had managed to extract and partially restore several images from the damaged film. Her voice carried an unmistakable tension when she asked Manning to come to the lab immediately, warning that what the photographs revealed was far more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. The crime lab's sterile environment always reminded Manning of a hospital, but today it felt more like a morgue. Dr. Reeves led her to a dark room where several photographs hung drying on a line, their water-damaged surfaces telling a story that had remained hidden for 15 years. The first few images were typical hiking photos, trail scenes, autumn foliage, the brothers posing beside towering evergreens with the easy confidence of experienced outdoorsmen. But the final 4 photographs told a dramatically different story. The first showed both brothers in the distance, standing at the edge of what appeared to be a clearing. Their body language suggested alertness rather than relaxation, as if they were observing something beyond the camera's range. The second image captured David alone, pointing at something with obvious urgency, his red jacket bright against the forest backdrop. The third photograph was deeply unsettling. David's face was clearly visible despite the water damage, contorted with unmistakable fear. His mouth hung open as if he were shouting a warning, his eyes fixed on something that had obviously terrified him. The final image showed a man's arm and shoulder reaching toward the camera, clothed in dark fabric, and captured mid-lunge as if attacking the photographer. Dr. Reeves explained that digital enhancement might reveal additional details hidden in the damaged emulsion, but warned that some information would be lost forever. Over the following weeks, she worked to clarify the background elements using computer software that could sharpen details and adjust contrast. What emerged from the photographic shadows would transform the Chen brothers' disappearance from a missing persons case into something far more sinister. The clearing David had been pointing toward contained crude wooden structures, walls and barriers that appeared deliberately constructed rather than naturally occurring. More disturbing was what enhancement revealed in the shadows between these structures, human figures in positions that suggested they were either deceased or somehow restrained. The wooden barriers were too high to climb easily and showed no obvious exits from inside. A forensic anthropologist studied the enhanced images, noting that the visible human figures appeared to be in unnatural positions consistent with death or restraint. The arrangement of wooden structures reminded her of historical accounts describing remote camps used for illegal activities, from Prohibition-era bootlegging operations to more recent militia compounds hidden in America's vast wilderness areas. Meanwhile, a wilderness expert used vegetation and terrain features visible in the photographs to identify potential locations. Cross-referencing these details with topographical maps and early satellite imagery, he identified 3 possible sites where the clearing might be located, all within a 5-mile radius of where the camera had been discovered. Each location was in rugged terrain that would have been easily overlooked during the original search efforts. As winter settled over the Cascades, Manning knew that locating the actual clearing would have to wait until spring, but the photographs provided enough evidence to officially reopen the Chen brothers' case as a potential homicide investigation. After 15 years of unanswered questions, David's camera had finally begun to reveal the truth, though that truth was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. The enhanced photographs suggested that Michael and David Chen had stumbled upon something they were never meant to see, something worth killing for in that remote corner of Washington's wilderness. Whatever they had discovered in that hidden clearing had cost them their lives, but the question of who was responsible remained unanswered as Detective Manning prepared for the most challenging investigation of her career. March 2006 brought the first weather suitable for a backcountry search operation. Detective Manning assembled a specialized team, including experienced search and rescue personnel, forensic technicians, and a guide familiar with the remote areas identified through photographic analysis. Their mission was to locate the clearing shown in David Chen's final photographs and determine what the brothers had encountered there 16 years earlier. The team gathered at dawn at the same trailhead where Michael Chen's pickup truck had been found in 1990. Manning had spent the winter months studying every detail of the original investigation, understanding now why searchers had failed to find any trace of the brothers. The 1990 search had focused on established trails, operating under the reasonable assumption that experienced hikers would stick to marked routes. David's photographs proved that assumption wrong. The first potential site lay 3 miles southeast of the main trail, in a narrow valley carved by seasonal water flow. The search team navigated increasingly difficult terrain, using GPS coordinates derived from the enhanced photographs to guide their way through dense forest that seemed untouched by human presence. After 4 hours of challenging hiking, they reached the coordinates but found only a natural clearing formed by an ancient rockslide with no sign of the wooden structures visible in David's images. The second location proved more promising. Situated in a depression between 2 ridges, it offered natural concealment that would appeal to anyone conducting illegal activities. The approach required the team to rappel down a steep slope using ropes, and Manning noticed broken branches and disturbed soil suggesting human passage, though the signs could have come from wildlife or other hikers over the years. The clearing they discovered matched the general size and shape shown in the photographs, but time had obscured any evidence of the structures David had documented. The search team spent hours examining the area with metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar, finding scattered debris and rotted wood fragments, but nothing definitively connecting the site to the Chen brothers. Frustrated, but determined, Manning pushed the team toward the third and most remote location before darkness fell. This site required an additional 2-mile hike through terrain so difficult it had likely never been thoroughly searched. The path followed an abandoned game trail, winding through natural terraces carved into the mountainside by geological processes spanning millennia. As they approached the final coordinates, the forest began to change character. Ancient trees created cathedral-like spaces between their massive trunks, while undergrowth thinned to allow better visibility. Several team members noted an eerie atmosphere as wildlife sounds gradually faded to unsettling silence, as if even animals avoided this particular area of the wilderness. The clearing, when they finally reached it, was unmistakable, despite 16 years of weathering and vegetation growth. The site clearly showed evidence of human construction, with collapsed wooden structures scattered throughout in patterns suggesting deliberate arrangement rather than natural accumulation. Manning felt her pulse quicken as she compared the actual location to David's enhanced photographs. This was undoubtedly where the brothers had made their final fatal discovery. The search team began the meticulous process of documenting and excavating the site, knowing that after 16 years, any evidence would be fragile and difficult to interpret. The first significant find came within hours. A piece of blue fabric buried beneath collapsed wooden walls that matched the description of Michael Chen's hiking shirt. The fabric showed clear signs of violent tearing rather than normal wear, with dark stains that field testing suggested might be blood. As excavation continued, additional evidence emerged. David's camera bag was found buried under several inches of soil and debris, its contents destroyed by years of moisture and decomposition. A metal camping cup bearing Michael's initials was discovered near what appeared to have been a fire pit, though no human remains were immediately apparent in the surrounding area. The wooden structures proved most puzzling. As the team cleared away accumulated debris and vegetation, they revealed crude but purposeful construction, walls forming a rough rectangular compound with separate chambers inside. The wood was locally sourced pine and fir, cut with basic tools and assembled without modern fasteners. Dr. James Morrison, the forensic anthropologist analyzing the site, concluded that the compound appeared designed to hold people against their will. The chamber walls were too high to climb easily, with no obvious exits from inside. Most disturbing were metal stakes and chain fragments embedded in wooden posts, suggesting the structures had been used for restraint. As evening approached and the team prepared to establish base camp for continued work, Manning stood in the center of the ruined compound and tried to imagine what horrors the Chen brothers had witnessed in this remote location. The excavation would continue for several more days, but already the team had uncovered enough evidence to confirm their worst suspicions. Michael and David Chen hadn't simply gotten lost or suffered an accident during their hiking trip. They had stumbled upon something so dangerous that it had cost them their lives. The question now was identifying who had built this remote prison and why they had been willing to kill to protect its secrets. The excavation continued for 3 more days, with each hour revealing new pieces of a horrifying puzzle that had remained hidden in the Washington wilderness for 16 years. On the second morning, the search team made the discovery Detective Manning had been dreading: human remains buried in a shallow grave at the far end of the clearing, partially concealed by fallen logs that had been deliberately arranged to hide the burial site. Dr. Morrison carefully excavated the remains with archaeological precision, cataloguing each bone and artifact as evidence of what had clearly been a violent crime. The remains were fragmentary and scattered, consistent with 16 years of exposure to weather, scavenging animals, and natural decomposition processes. Initial examination suggested two individuals, both male and approximately the right age and build to be the Chen brothers. What troubled Dr. Morrison most was the condition of the bones themselves. Several skull fragments bore clear impact marks from blunt instruments, while arm and rib bones showed fractures inconsistent with accidental injury. The pattern of trauma painted a picture of sustained, brutal assault that had occurred around the time of death. The forensic evidence confirmed Manning's worst fears about how the brothers had died. Dental records provided definitive identification within a week. The remains were indeed those of Michael and David Chen, finally recovered after 16 years of mystery. For their elderly parents, still living in Issaquah, the news brought a complex mixture of grief and relief. Eleanor Chen had never stopped hoping her sons might someday walk through the front door, but knowing the truth was better than living with endless uncertainty about their fate. The recovery of the brothers' remains answered one crucial question, but created many others. Who had built this remote compound? Who had killed the Chen brothers when they discovered it? Most importantly, how many other victims might have suffered similar fates in this hidden corner of the wilderness? Manning's investigation took on new urgency as she worked to identify the perpetrators and understand the full scope of their crimes. The construction materials found at the site were examined for identifying marks that might trace them to specific sources. Metal stakes and chains were analyzed for manufacturing details that could narrow down when and where they had been purchased. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source when Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a botanist consulted to determine how long the site had been abandoned, discovered non-native plant species in the clearing. The plants Dr. Rodriguez identified were varieties commonly used in illegal marijuana cultivation during the 1980s and early 1990s. Their presence, combined with the remote location and the compound's design, suggested the site had been used as a concealed drug operation. The wooden structures weren't just for holding people. They had been part of a sophisticated growing and processing facility that someone had invested considerable resources to establish. This revelation transformed Manning's understanding of what the Chen brothers had encountered. They hadn't simply discovered abandoned structures or met random criminals. They had accidentally uncovered a major marijuana-growing operation, complete with armed security willing to kill anyone who threatened the enterprise. The timing made perfect sense, as the late 1980s and early 1990s had seen a surge in illegal cultivation throughout the remote areas of the Cascade Mountains. Manning began cross-referencing her investigation with drug enforcement records from the early 1990s, looking for operations that had been identified but never fully investigated, suspects who had escaped arrest, and patterns that might connect to the compound where the brothers died. The process required reviewing thousands of pages of reports and interview transcripts from decades-old cases, but eventually led to a crucial breakthrough. The key came from Jerome "Tank" Williams, a convicted drug dealer serving time at the Washington State Penitentiary. Williams had been arrested in 1992 for involvement in a major marijuana distribution network operating throughout western Washington. When Manning interviewed him about possible connections to the Cascade compound, Williams initially denied any knowledge of the site. However, when Manning showed him photographs of the excavated compound, Williams's demeanor changed dramatically. After consulting with his attorney, he agreed to provide information in exchange for consideration of his pending parole application. What Williams told Manning provided the final pieces of the puzzle that had haunted investigators for 16 years. According to Williams, the compound had been established in 1989 by Thomas "Tommy" Briggs, a violent criminal who had moved from California to establish new trafficking routes in the Pacific Northwest. Briggs had recruited local criminals to help construct and operate the remote facility, using the natural concealment of the forest to avoid detection by law enforcement agencies that were increasingly targeting marijuana operations. The operation had been successful for over a year, producing high-quality marijuana distributed throughout Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. But by October 1990, increased law enforcement pressure had made Briggs paranoid and trigger-happy. When the Chen brothers accidentally discovered the compound during their photography expedition, Briggs made the fatal decision to eliminate potential witnesses rather than risk exposure of his lucrative operation. Williams claimed Briggs had personally killed both brothers, then ordered immediate abandonment of the site. The entire operation was hastily shut down, with equipment and evidence buried or destroyed to eliminate traces of their activities. Briggs himself had fled to Mexico shortly afterward, successfully avoiding capture despite federal warrants for his arrest on multiple drug trafficking charges. Williams provided enough specific details about the operation and Briggs' methods to convince Manning that his account was credible. The final confirmation came from forensic analysis of items recovered from the compound. Tool marks on wooden structures matched equipment confiscated from another Briggs operation in 1991, while DNA analysis of blood traces found on metal stakes yielded profiles matching both Chen brothers. Armed with Williams' testimony and physical evidence from the compound, Detective Manning faced the challenge of bringing Thomas Briggs to justice for murders committed 16 years earlier. The first obstacle was locating Briggs, who had successfully avoided capture despite federal law enforcement efforts to track him down in Mexico over the intervening years. Manning worked with DEA agents who had maintained active files on Briggs since his disappearance, following reports of his involvement in various Mexican operations. But Briggs had proven adept at avoiding detection, using false identities and staying constantly mobile to evade capture by both American and Mexican authorities seeking him on drug trafficking charges. The breakthrough came from retired DEA agent Robert Martinez, who had worked the original case against Briggs' network and maintained an unofficial personal interest in capturing the violent criminal who had escaped justice. Martinez revealed that his private surveillance efforts had located Briggs living in Puerto Vallarta under the assumed identity of Robert Thomas, operating a charter boat business catering to American tourists. The cover was perfect for someone trying to maintain a low profile while generating legitimate income, but Martinez had confirmed Briggs' identity through careful observation during several personal visits to Puerto Vallarta. The information provided Manning with the leverage needed to coordinate an international capture operation, though extradition would prove complicated by Mexico's traditional refusal to surrender suspects facing potential death penalty charges. Working with federal prosecutors, Manning structured murder charges in a way that would make extradition possible while ensuring Briggs faced appropriate punishment for his crimes. The process took nearly 2 years to complete, during which Manning continued building her case by interviewing additional witnesses and gathering forensic evidence needed for trial. In March 2008, Thomas Briggs was arrested by Mexican federal police as he returned to Puerto Vallarta from a fishing charter. The arrest was conducted quietly to avoid alerting any associates who might help him escape again. Within days, he was transported to Mexico City and extradited to the United States to face aggravated murder charges in the deaths of Michael and David Chen. The trial began in September 2008, nearly 18 years after the brothers' deaths. King County Prosecutor Maria Santos assembled a comprehensive case based on Williams's testimony, forensic evidence from the compound, and DNA analysis linking Briggs to the crime scene. The prosecution painted a picture of a paranoid drug dealer who killed two innocent hikers to protect his criminal operation from exposure. Briggs's defense attorney argued that the case relied on unreliable testimony from a convicted drug dealer seeking leniency, combined with circumstantial evidence from a contaminated crime scene. He pointed out that no eyewitnesses had directly observed Briggs committing the murders, and that physical evidence, while suggestive, wasn't conclusive proof of guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The jury heard detailed testimony from Williams describing how Briggs operated the compound and his violent reaction to the brothers' discovery. Dr. Morrison testified about trauma evident on the recovered remains, while forensic experts explained DNA analysis connecting blood evidence to both victims. Perhaps most powerful were David's enhanced photographs, used by prosecutors to reconstruct the brothers' final terrifying moments. The defense attempted to discredit Williams by highlighting his extensive criminal record and motivation to cooperate for reduced sentencing. They argued that the compound could have been operated by numerous criminals, and that Williams was simply telling prosecutors what they wanted to hear to secure his own release from prison. But the physical evidence proved compelling. DNA analysis linking both brothers' blood to metal stakes at the compound, combined with toolmark analysis showing Briggs' equipment had been used in construction, created an overwhelming web of evidence. The prosecution methodically connected each piece to build a case that was difficult to dispute or explain away. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 2 counts of aggravated murder. Thomas Briggs was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, finally facing justice for crimes committed nearly 2 decades earlier. For the Chen family, the verdict brought closure to a tragedy that had defined their lives for 18 years, though nothing could restore the sons they had lost. The conviction of Thomas Briggs closed one of Washington state's most enduring cold cases, but also raised troubling questions about other victims who might have suffered similar fates in the remote wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest. Manning's investigation revealed not just details of one horrific crime, but evidence of a broader pattern of violence associated with illegal drug operations hidden in the region's vast forests. In months following the trial, Manning worked with federal authorities to identify other missing persons cases potentially connected to similar drug operations. The pattern was disturbing. Hikers, campers, and outdoor enthusiasts who had vanished without trace in areas later discovered to be sites of illegal cultivation or processing. Many cases remained unsolved, their victims lost to families who would never know their fate. The Chen family established a foundation in memory of Michael and David, dedicated to improving search and rescue capabilities in Washington's wilderness areas. They lobbied successfully for legislation requiring more sophisticated tracking and communication equipment for backcountry operations, hoping to prevent other families from enduring decades of uncertainty they had experienced. For Detective Manning, the case became a defining moment, demonstrating both the power of modern forensic science and the importance of never abandoning cold cases. David's camera had preserved evidence across 16 years, allowing justice to finally be served, despite the passage of time and the remoteness of the crime scene. The discovery highlighted dangerous intersections between outdoor recreation and criminal activity in remote wilderness areas. Law enforcement agencies throughout the Pacific Northwest began coordinating more effectively to share intelligence about drug operations and missing persons cases, recognizing that forests attracting tourists also provided perfect cover for criminal enterprises. Jerome Williams was released on parole in 2009 after serving 17 years in prison. He maintained that his cooperation represented an attempt to atone for past crimes and provide closure to a family that had suffered too long without answers. Critics argued he had manipulated the system for personal benefit, but prosecutors insisted that without his testimony, Briggs might never have faced justice. The compound where the Chen brothers died was thoroughly excavated and destroyed by federal authorities, who wanted to ensure it could never again be used for criminal purposes. The site was left to return to its natural state, though a small marker was placed nearby to commemorate victims who had lost their lives there. Thomas Briggs began serving his life sentence at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, maintaining his innocence through initial appeals before eventually stopping legal challenges as options were exhausted. Guards reported that he spent most time alone, seemingly haunted by violence that had defined his life and ultimately led to his downfall. The case also impacted hiking and camping practices throughout the Cascade Mountains. Park services and outdoor recreation organizations began emphasizing the importance of staying on marked trails and informing others of exact hiking plans. The story became a cautionary tale told around campfires and in wilderness safety courses, a reminder that experienced outdoor enthusiasts could encounter dangers beyond natural mountain hazards. Dr. Patricia Reeves continued her forensic imaging work on cold cases throughout the Pacific Northwest, using techniques pioneered in recovering David's photographs to solve dozens of other cases where photographic evidence had seemed lost forever. She often reflected on how a simple camera, submerged in a mountain creek for 15 years, had become the key to solving one of the region's most puzzling mysteries. As years passed, the story of the Chen brothers became part of Cascade Mountain's folklore, always with understanding that it was based on tragic reality rather than legend. Their fate served as sobering reminder that wilderness, loved for its beauty and solitude, could also conceal unspeakable horrors, but also demonstrated that even the most carefully hidden crimes would eventually come to light, and that justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail. The camera that captured David's final photographs was eventually returned to his parents, who kept it as both memorial to their sons and symbol of truth that had finally emerged from 16 years of darkness. Sometimes they reflected that the most ordinary objects, a hiking camera, a chance discovery by strangers, could become instruments of justice, ensuring that even the most remote crimes would not remain hidden forever in the vast wilderness of Washington's Cascade Mountains.